I'd like to have the student curator to please stand. Phenomenal job. We had a chance to see the exhibits on Sunday before we left, and I'm telling you, we could not get folks to come back in here where they were supposed to because they were so excited about the exhibit. And so many of the things that are out there, as Sarah had said, are things that we hadn't even seen before. You know, whether it was the letter from Josie Nolan to her parents, you know, that she wrote while she was in the building, or, oh my goodness, some of the really comical yells that President Knight got. We knew these kinds of things were going on. We just hadn't seen the letter. And so it's just very thorough and very comprehensive, and we were very appreciative. I want to say something about the university welcoming us back. I read that Chronicle's editorial last Friday, reappropriating history, whitewashing the takeover. I think that there were a lot of good points in that editorial, but I have to tell you that the protesters were very happy to be welcomed back and to be embraced. And a lot of it has to do with what was happening when we left. And so even though it did take 50 years for it to happen, and the editorial really points that out, we were just very pleased that at this point, the university recognizes that something good did take place, and we really did make a contribution. And whenever you can get affirmed, I don't care how long it takes, it makes a difference. And I know that they talked in the editorial about some of the challenges on the campus now, especially as it reflects current day activists and protesters on the campus. And the second panel that we had on Saturday that addressed intergenerational issues around activism and protesting brought out a lot of the same issues that was reflected in this editorial. So the only thing that I would say is that whenever you make a choice to take a stand for what you believe, you just have to be prepared for the consequences, whatever form those consequences might take. I'd like to share just a few words about who we were when we arrived on campus. As we have gotten feedback, especially from some of the children of the protesters who were here on Saturday, one of them commented on just the intellectual power that was reflected just in the panel. Because we talked about how most of us were either valedictorians or salutatorians, or we had been National Achievement Scholars or National Achievement Finalists. And if you know anything about the National Achievement Program, it is designated by the National Merit Corporation. We also were a group who had been active in our local communities. Almost all of us came from the South. And because of that, we were in the midst of the civil rights movement in this country. So it shouldn't be any surprise that many of us as elementary students, junior high students, and high school students had already been on picket lines and participating in some of the sit-ins that were taking place in our hometowns. Most of us came from working class families. Many of us were the first in our families to go to college. And when we left home, there was a lot of pride in our ability to come to a university like Duke. So that tells you a little bit about who we were when we got here. And we spent some time talking about what we found when we got here. And know that just a first step in the integration process is just to accept black students and to accept people of different ethnicities and races to even come on the campus. So the university had made that decision. The Supreme Court had ruled on separate but equal and had gotten rid of that designation in the 1954 court decision. And it was about 9 years later that the university admitted its first class of black students in 1963. Those of us who were in Allen Building were in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th classes of black folk at Duke. The class numbers were very small. I think when my class arrived in 1967, we may have had about 30 students in that class, and we doubled the number of black students that were already on campus. When, it was a process to get to the place of actually wanting to go into the building. It was a 2.5-year process as we had protests on the campus, as we had a study in President Knight's office, as we had marches going to President Knight's home, especially protesting the fact that the university was still using segregated facilities, and they would, when they had some of their athletic award programs, some of the first black athletes couldn't attend because they didn't allow blacks to come into their facilities. And of course, when we first got here, the president of the university was a member of the segregated country club himself. And then once we got on the campus, it was not unusual to feel that folk did not want us here. It was reflected in the way that they talked. Sometimes we could hear the comments. Sometimes they were dropped. I would say that one of the saddest things that occurred is when our professors or students would question our ability to do the work. I think that one of the most traumatic things that somebody can do is just question your humanity. And that was repeated oftentimes in ways that some folk might say, well, you're just a little too sensitive. People call you a name. What does that mean? People wear blackface. What does that mean? But what folks fail to realize is that when you come from a race that has been marginalized and just had its humanity questioned from the moment that they came to the shores, everything that is an indignity builds upon what has already happened. And there should, unless you can be very empathetic for what a person has gone through, it's very easy to want to write it off. It's not been very important, really not making a difference, but trust me, it really does. And so all of those things had begun to build. And I think that when the university first admitted black students, they hadn't taken fully into account the role that the social and cultural environment plays in a student's ability to be successful. I think that more universities are recognizing that now. When we made the decision to go into the building, it was after a series of meetings. Everybody was not on board with going in. And, we would have our Afro-American Society meetings, and people would make the case for pros and cons of going or not going. And we had essentially said that we would not go in unless we could get almost unanimous agreement amongst the black student population to go in. And that is what happened. And so people ask me, well, what are some of your most vivid memories from that day? And I can tell you, it really started the night before when we were all at Charles Beckton's home. Charles Beckton was the only graduate student that went in the building with us. The rest of us were 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. But Beckton was a first-year law school student. And we had met at his home on LeBlanc, which is literally right behind East Campus. Some of us spent the night here that night. And the next morning, we had rented a U-Haul truck, and we all climbed into the truck, and we were driven to what some call the front of Allen Building, which is the side that faces Campus Drive. And we all jumped out in a hurry. We had practiced this thing in our minds, you know, and we had sent somebody in to sort of scout out the building. And so we really had put significant planning into the process. And we were able to get in and lock the doors very, very quickly. And right after that was done, Chuck Hopkins, who was, I think he was chairman of the Afro-American Society, because Michael McBride was the president. And Chuck immediately called Dean Griffith, who was Dean of Students, and told him that we were in the building, that the building was secured, and that we had a list of demands. And I think Dean Griffith said to him, Chuck, let me get back to you. And for the rest of that day, most of us, we took our school books in, we were reading, we were talking, and it wasn't until this weekend that we discovered somebody had actually taken some pictures of our being in the building. For 50 years, most of us did not know that. And we were able to see the pictures, our 18, 19, 20-year-old selves. It was like pretty amazing to see that. And the other thing that came out in the pictures is how well-mannered and orderly everything was, because after the takeover, you know, they had talked about how we had damaged the building, and we were the ones that created the riot. And so when you talked about from having this exhibit be from the students' point of view, that was like a true blessing, because up until now, you've only heard the narrative from the administration. So Chuck Hopkins was the person who was the person who was designated to talk to the administration. And he was on the phone all day long. And some of us recollect that there were several times that the university had given us to get out of the building. And every time some folk left because they had found a way to leave the building from the back of the building through a window. So that by the time it was that afternoon around 4, the university had said this was the final ultimatum. They were going to send in the police to get us. And our scouts on the outside, we had some walkie-talkies, they had communicated that police and other law enforcement were in Duke Gardens, and they indeed were preparing to come on campus. And so about this time, somebody called for a vote on whether or not we should stay or leave. And by this time, we may have gone in with between 50 and 60 students, but at this time we were down to 25. And the guys had insisted chauvinistically that all the women leave. And so there were a couple of us women who refused to leave. You know, we were going to go down with the ship. We didn't know how closely we came to the ship going down. So we took a vote, and the first time we voted, my recollection was that it was I thought it was a tie, but we were told by the vote keeper, who was Charles Beckton, that it was 13 to 12 to stay in the building. And at that point, we started to prepare for the tear gas, because we had read somewhere or somebody had told us that if we put cigarette filters in our nose and squeeze lemon juice in our eyes, that it would protect us from the damage of the tear gas. So you can imagine that image. Some folk had even gotten either trash cans or other tin cans that they could put on top of their head. Now, I don't know what we thought we were going to do against guns and batons and all of that. But when we had discussed the possibility of taking a weapon in, it was very adamant on the part of our leadership, no weapons of any kind, because we didn't want to give the administration any excuse to beat us over the head or even to potentially kill us. So after we were preparing to stay, somebody had the good sense to ask for another vote. And we just learned recently from Charles Beckton, who was taking the vote, that the vote was still 13 to 12 to stay. And Beckton, this is where his wisdom and maturity came in, because he thought it was time for us to get out of there. So he told us that it was 13 to 12 to leave. And many of the original protesters just found this out on Saturday. And I mean, it just boggled our minds, right? Because we just didn't know it. But we now owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Charles Beckton, because as we were leaving the building, the law enforcement folk were coming in the side closest to Campus Drive, and they came in throwing tear gas. And I can only imagine, given what we had seen on television in our southern towns, about how the police were beating up black folks, sticking dogs on them, turning on hoses on them. I can only imagine what could have happened if we were not back in town. So we're very grateful. And the other wonderful thing that happened as we were coming out the door is that a line of white students had placed themselves so that they could protect us. It was the most amazing thing. They were trying to not only shield us from the police, but shield us from the university being able to see who we were, because we knew something was probably going to happen. And it was a very moving thing. I mean, some of those students, those former students, they showed up on Saturday. We were so happy to see them. Once we got out, the university decided to put us on trial because we had we violated some policy. What they did, they had been able to identify some of the people who were in the building, maybe about either between 13 and 17 students. And so as a part of our strategy, we decided everybody who was in the building, even black students who were not in the building, we were going to say that we were in the building. And that's what we did. With the strategy being, we did not think that the university would put their entire black student population out of the university. And we know that that strategy worked because if you read some of the material from the discussion of the hearing officers and the conference in the law school, you will see that they were saying how they weren't able to really determine full culpability as to, who were the leaders, who made it happen, because all of us signed up as having been responsible. And so they put us on probation for a year. So in terms of the lasting impact on the university and on us, it was really marvelous to hear Dean Ashby speak on Saturday and talk about some of the changes that have been made here at the university. She talked about the number of students that are now being admitted. She talked about the number of senior administrators, the number of African American professors. I mean, it just really brought joy to our hearts, because when we left here, we really were designated the bad guys. And to see that taking a stand for what we believed was the right thing to do, for the university to become more inclusive and to accept us as human beings on this campus, was the right thing to do. And so I will close with this. I have 3 grandchildren, and they heard the panel, and my 8-year-old grandson turns to my son and says, "Daddy, I didn't know that Mama Cat was a change maker." He says, "When I go back to school, I'm just gonna press my chest out a little bit more." And in that moment, I, realized what a difference we had made. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pilson. I'm here serving you guys as BSA Chief of Staff. And if y'all will bear with me for a little bit, I'm a little under the weather. So, but I would feel remiss. I would be remiss if I didn't first preface this talk by saying thank you. Thank you to the original 5, because without you, we wouldn't be here. You all have to endure so much so that we didn't have to. Thank you for all the students who occupied the Allen Building the first and the second time, because you all started the culture of activism on campus as kept the university accountable for the last 50 years. Thank you to all the people who work at Duke every day to make sure that students of color have an experience on campus that they can be proud of and that they can live through. And then in that same way, I want to take this moment and I want to take this time to acknowledge Dr. Brenda Armstrong. As a member of BSA, I respect her, because for those of you who don't know, she was a very fair president of Black Student Council. And what she did on this campus, both as a student and as a staff member, fundamentally changed the way that Duke interacts with Black students on this campus. And for that, I will be forever grateful. So, if y'all don't mind, I'm going to tell you all a few stories. And these stories are in no way comprehensive, but I hope to illustrate the ways in which student activism has worked on campus and the ways in which the university has responded. So, this brings me to my first story. So about 50 years ago today, Black students involved in the Afro-American Society, which was an organization that predated BSA, came up with a list of 12 demands, and they decided they were going to protest to see these demands met. And just to give you a feel for what the demands were, some of the demands were the establishment of the Department of the African American Studies, to make sure that the Black population on Duke's campus reflected that of the Black population in the South, to establish a Black dorm, and to immediately end all the police harassment on campus of Black students. Now mind you, these students have been fighting for these demands for years before they decided to protest. They even wrote in their demands that they exhausted all proper channels before deciding to protest. So these 50 students took control of the Allen Building and vowed to stay in the building until their demands were met. And after some attempts of negotiation, Duke decided to call the police in. And in response, hundreds of white students gathered to put themselves between the police and the protesters in the house. And not all their demands were met in that time, and still they haven't. But Duke has since established a AAAS program, and in 1983, they established the Megan Williams Center for Black Culture. And though some of the demands were met, we still have a long way to go. Which brings me to my second story. So let me set the scene for you all. So this was circa 2016. Racial incidents had been happening all year on campus. This was a year where the news was hung up in the Bryan Center. But the big issue in 2016 was Tom Trask. Now, if you guys don't know, Tom Trask is a Duke administrator who hit a woman with his car, called her the N-word, and drove off. He still collects a paycheck from Duke, by the way. And this spoke to a fundamental devaluation of Duke's non-academic staff. 9 students said that was right, and they chose to occupy the Allen building in response to that. They demanded that an immediate investigation go into the workings of the conditions. They demanded an immediate investigation into the working conditions of Duke employees. They also demanded that the man that hit a woman with his car, called her the N-word and drove off, was terminated. He still has not been. And they demanded that Duke raise their pay for Duke workers to a living wage. And so they occupied the Allen building for about a week. And in that week, Duke did everything in their power to get them out, from turning off the electricity to essentially starving them, because they didn't let anything in or out of the Allen building at the time. It got to the point where students in support of the protesters had to rig up a pulley system to make sure that the students in the Allen building could eat. And after about a week, those protesters were forced out. And none of their demands were met except for amnesty for the protesters, which wasn't even part of their original demands. And so this brings me to my last story. And let me set the stage for you one more time. This was circa 2016 again when I was here. And it was last year, after a litany of racial incidents had happened across campus, and Duke was looking to acknowledge the anniversary of the 1968 silent vigil. To do so, they had reached out to various student activists on campus. This, however, was disingenuous given the ways in which Duke usually responds to student activism in real time. So in response, about 25 brave students, including the BSA president at the time and our current young trustee, took the stage and interrupted the address that President Price was giving. And that's when the room went crazy. So, a crowd of alum, who you guessed it, was mostly white, took it upon themselves to let the students know how much they disliked their demonstration. So let me give you this visual. You have 25 students of mixed races and ethnic backgrounds standing on stage, and then you have all of these white alums yelling, jeering, cursing, telling them to get the F off stage, telling them they don't deserve their degrees. And that whole time, Duke admin stood by and did nothing. And so the purpose of this talk is not to spend 10 minutes condemning Duke admin. But I will say that Duke has a responsibility to protect their students. And so it's troubling to me that these events were allowed to persist in the way that they were. So what do we learn from all these things, right? So the first thing we learn is that many of the concerns that students raise on campus are valid. So at the expense of sounding like a broken record, a man hit a woman with his car, called her the N-word, and then drove off. If this doesn't indicate a gross devaluation of Duke workers, I don't know what does. The second thing we learned is that there's a huge disconnect between the way that Duke remembers activists and the way that Duke treats them in real time. Because let's not forget that in all of these situations, the students who peacefully protested, the students which Duke has a responsibility to protect, were treated like the enemy. Students involved in the first Allen building takeover were tear gassed, to the point where, like she said earlier, they had to put cigarette filters in their noses and lemon juices in their eyes to make sure they didn't feel the effects. Students in the second Allen building takeover were starved out to the point where they had to rig up pulley systems to make sure they could eat every day. And all of these students were threatened with punitive action. And the third thing we learned from these events were that these events have real material effects on students. Because for every student who comes to Duke and fights for what's right and endures, there are 2 or 3 who don't graduate. And students have been putting their physical and mental health on the line for years just to make sure that Duke is a livable place. And so the last thing we learned from this is that allies are necessary to success. Because in all the stories I've recounted, allies were critical to the success of the endeavor. In the first Allen Building takeover, white students locked arms and put themselves between police and protesters to protect the people inside. In the second Allen Building takeover, students camped outside in tents to show their support for what was going on. And after the disruption of rights of speech last year, admin like Dean Ashby did what they could to protect students from punitive action. And I shudder to think what would have happened if in any of these situations had allies not been there. So I will conclude with this. We as students have power. Our power first comes in our voices, because we have the power to make noise, and lots of it. And Duke doesn't like it when we make noise, especially when that noise is condemning. Second, our power is in our work. Students have been able to make major waves on campus when they put their minds to it. Since I've been here, students have gotten Duke to ban the box on employment applications. Students have assisted in protecting health care for low-income students. And students have gotten Duke to make movements on a hate and bias policy. And lastly, when we leave Duke, our power is in our pockets. Because money quite literally moves down. And this is not to say that students are obligated to live to a university that they don't feel comfortable about. But this is to say that Duke needs to take it upon themselves to make Duke a livable environment and an environment that students want to give back to. And if I'm being honest, I go to a school where people can write the N-word on a wall, people can hit women with their cars, and people can hang nooses all without consequence. And if I'm being honest, that's not a school that I'd like to get to. Thank you, and good night.
Good evening. It's my great honor to have the opportunity to stand before you to just offer some brief remarks about the occasion for which we gathered. My name is Chandra Guinn, and I continue to be privileged to serve as the director of the Mary Lou Williams Center for Black Culture here at Duke University. My tenure began in 2005, and since that time I have endeavored to do all that I could to ensure that the students that were charged with being here at any given time had a connection to the history of the institution and the place, and to the alumni that have come before them, that they have an appreciation for the effort that it takes to be in this place, to inhabit this place. And so we are very grateful for the work that the curators did in once again revisiting the Allen Building takeover. It is certainly a monumental milestone in the history of this institution, and one that has fueled a lot of concern and care over the years. We entered this picture in terms of being a Black cultural center because one of the demands that was issued on February 13, 1969 was a demand for a Black student union. And as the center has evolved over the years, we come to see our connection to the demands in that particular one, Demand 7. At the time, 1969, as folks have stated, there were activist movements around the country at universities, predominantly white institutions in particular, where students were demanding their presence on the campus. And in addition to asking for things on the academic side to help them in terms of being represented in the curriculum, they were also asking for space. Space to gather, space to hold community with one another, to be social, to explore culture in ways that were not confined to a classroom. We believe that the genesis of Black cultural centers, particularly at predominantly white institutions, grows out of that moment and exists in that spirit. Black cultural centers were created to be bridges to community. They were created to be incubators for student activism and ideas, and we continue to serve in that vein even until today. In 1969, I point to Demand 7. I acknowledge to you that it was 1983 before the Mary Lou Williams Center would come into being on this campus. What we know, without a doubt, and as an early birthday gift, in any time that you can go Frederick Douglass, I think it's appropriate. What we know is that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And so with that, we are grateful for the students that over those 14 years continued to demand space for themselves to gather on the campus. We believe that our existence today is owed to the students that began the struggle in 69, but continued in 75, continued in 77, continued in 79, and continue until this day. What we hope to explore this evening, following the reception opening for the exhibit, is what do you do once demands are realized? What work is there left to do? And we invite you into the Flowers building and into conversation about that very topic. Because what we know, without a doubt, is it is incredibly, vitally important that the conversation continues. That we not allow commemoration or celebration to lull us into believing that everything is all right now. While I may not go as far as to say what the previous speaker did, I do want to acknowledge that I am often saddened that I would have to report to you that there are days when my competency continues to be questioned. It's saddening that it's questioned by students, but it's especially saddening when it's questioned by colleagues. And there are different ways that questioning happens, right? Sometimes it's unacknowledgement, right? It's actually not being seen as competent for the work that you've been tasked with, or not recognizing that you actually have the capacity to do more than just help the students plan a particular event that they want to do. So with that, what I want to acknowledge and say is how grateful I am for my colleagues in the Duke University Archives, Valerie and Amy, and others that we've had the chance to work with, to the colleagues in the Duke Alumni Association that thought it made sense for folks to want to take a behind-the-scenes look at the demands and how they come into being when you move beyond the paper and have to actually put some work behind what has been asked for. So we are grateful for the colleagues that we are privileged to work with. What we want you to know, as Ms. LeBlanc has said, is that affirmation matters. One of the themes for our annual Martin Luther King Jr. commemoration that happens in January several years ago that I offered was that we must act to honor. And I say that to our students, I say that to you. If Black students are going to matter, if Black lives are going to matter, if your life is going to matter, then you must act to honor those who've made the sacrifice. For you to sit where you sit, to be privileged to know what you know, and to rest on the fact that you do nothing about it. Acting to honor is the responsibility of everybody, because we did not get here by ourselves. And so I just encourage folks to continue to be vigilant wherever you are, to know that Black institutions matter. They matter at Duke. They matter in Durham in the form of the Hayti Heritage Center. They matter in North Carolina at the Harvey Gantt Arts Center that should have been named for Dr. Bertha Roddy and the other woman who helped her found it, but it's nonetheless named for a man. They matter in D.C. at the National Museum for African American History and Culture. There's no excuse for people's ignorance today. So we have to own it, and we have to do something about it. If we want our actions to match up and align with what we say that we value. In this Black History Month, I encourage you to support a Black institution, wherever it may be found. And then I'm going to encourage you to do the same next month, and the month after that, and the month after that, and the month after that. Because while Carter G. Woodson was brave and pioneering in the creation of Black History Week, I think we would be remiss if we cannot move beyond February in 2019 to recognize how we matter in this world. With that, I invite you over to the Mary Lou Williams Center. We like to say it's where Black culture blossoms on campus. The students have certainly set the stage for your further engagement with the Allen Building takeover, but as Corey has so eloquently mentioned, with the demands that have continued and persisted even until 2018, we're going to take a look at those. We're going to ask you what work is there left to do. We're going to invite you to think with us about how we do it and who needs to have that message and who needs to hear that message. I encourage you today to stay engaged, be empowered, and know that you matter. And we are grateful for your presence here this evening. We invite you to the center tonight or at any time that your visit to Duke would allow time for it. Know that we are here for you, for your students, and for our colleagues doing the work that began so long ago, but with strength and with courage and conviction in a way that celebrates the vitality of the folks who are 50 years with us and telling us that they're proud of us and they recognize what we're doing and are grateful for us being faithful to the task. So I thank you for this opportunity. Again, thank you, Valerie and Amy. And with that, I'll say goodnight.